Alright, decided to do a fall version of Fridays in the Backyard with Dr. Walker. It's mid-September here in Oklahoma. We're standing in the same spot as we were standing on the first episode. And on the first episode in early spring, that all just looked like a lawn. All the prairie had been knocked down. The plants, the perennials, and the annual seeds were all in there, but we let it grow up. And now in the fall time, the only part I mow back there is basically trails, which almost turn into tunnels at this time of year, going through different patches of prairie. Each patch we treat a little differently in terms of how long we let it grow before knocking it down and what sort of seeds we put in there or plants we put in there. So we'll take a tour of fall in the backyard. Alright, I'm at the same place I was in the springtime when we were talking about dandelions and clover. At this spot, and I mentioned how that clover was a member of the pea family, pounding nitrogen into the soil. You can see now what used to look like pure lawn in the springtime has grown up into the native prairie. And you can hear all the life in there as all the insects are singing away. What that's doing right now is it's pounding carbon, photosynthate, sugars down into the soil. That's feeding all the microorganisms, all the soil biology, and in return, that soil biology, all those worms and insects and grubs, they're aerating the soil, they're cycling the nutrients, and we end up with this incredibly fertile soil, even though we never fertilize down here, but we end up with Maximilian sunflowers that are 12 feet tall sometimes, and the whole thing starts to feel a little bit like a tunnel as you walk through the fall prairie, even though it was all just looking like a lawn in the springtime. But we've been working for 5-10 years now on reestablishing native prairies. This is a 1-year-old prairie plot right here that used to be a burn pile, and we just decided to put some seeds in there, and over the course of the season you'll have different flowers. We had our wild bergamot or bee balm in there blooming in the blooming in the spring. You can see the heads of the purple coneflower that were blooming in the summer. Now it's the Maximilian sunflower turn. Pretty soon you're going to end up with the yellow wing stem taking over, and before too long you're going to have your asters, fall asters, putting on the big show. So the trick is to, here's my purple coneflower seed head. There, I got that wrong on the other. The trick is to get seeds in there that are going to be giving you product all year long. If you turn and look at the other prairie, this is about a 8-year project, and we have to come in each winter and take out the pecan trees. But we'll get black-eyed Susans through this prairie and all sorts of other prairie plants. Alright, we're at the same spot that we were looking at crow poison and wild onion. In the springtime, and you can see how this prairie's grown up. This is a 2-year-old prairie, but I mowed it after the first year, so this just looked like a lawn when we were here in the springtime. But letting it grow up, you can see how much biodiversity is in here. Oklahoma in the fall, in terms of pretty stuff to look at, mostly it's going to be in the sunflower family. We've got our black-eyed Susans, we've got our tickseed, we've got our sunflowers, we've got our late bone set over here. We've got elephantopus here. All of these are in the sunflower family. And as we progress into fall in Oklahoma, it really becomes the sunflower family show and the grass family show. You can see some blue stems there and other grasses mixed in, but there's an Indian grass right there. you can see how tall this prairie is, only 2 years away from being a lawn. And it's essentially a tunnel. Now we've left the trees because we like them and they provide shade and cool. Here's a walnut tree, the really compound leaf, and there's the black walnut itself. You break it open and end up finding something that looks a lot like a walnut inside. It's super black pulp on it, and that'll stain. It's also kind of exciting to mow at this time of year because you go over a place like this with the mower and you just hear things going zing, zing, zing as you're shooting walnuts out. It also releases what's called an allelopathic substance, which is a chemical that prevents germination of other plants underneath it. So be cautious if you have a black walnut in your yard to not get too excited about planting annual beds underneath it. We're here at the Hammock. The pecan, which was knocked down in the tornado, remains living, although horizontal. Perfect place for a hammock, and you can get your shade. I have a couple patches of prairie here that are only 1 year old that I had to knock down because of ragweed and other invasive plants getting in there. We'll give them another year and see if I got those plants out. You can see the owl house behind me. This patch was actually a little bit taller in the springtime because I'd let it grow for 3 years, but at that time we had locust trees start to sneak their way in, and I had to mow it this year just to knock those down, else they were just going to take over. Behind me is my favorite patch of prairie. It's about a 5-year-old prairie, a little drier than the other spots in the yard, but it's our best patch of big blue stem, which is probably my favorite grass in the prairie. It gets 8 to 10 feet tall. You can see the yellow goldenrod creeping in here. You can also see the oaks and the pecans that we have to work with, and elms that we have to take out each winter. We'll just get in here with a pair of pruners and take those out. We've got some milkweed in here for the monarchs, ashy sunflower, which is a fantastic show in June and early July. But you know, we just want that cycling. We want the good show in June with some plants, good show in July. This is a 1 year plant, a 1 year plot. I've been mowing this for 15 years, and this year I just decided to let it go and see what happens. We've got some bone set coming in here. We've got some pearly everlasting coming in. We've got a good amount of fall asters, which are popping up. And come late October, early November, this will be your most important pollinator plant that we have out here. It will get swarmed with butterflies, and as those monarchs come through in late October, this is what they're going to be hitting hardest. This is a 3-year patch that I'm really not pleased with. A lot of ragweed sneaking in there, some invasive plants sneaking in there. This is a patch which is probably going to get knocked down this year. And behind me is a 2-year patch, which I've really been working at because it's got some good Artemisia wormwood in there, which I like. It also has a lot of kind of spiny native blackberries, which are really hard to get rid of, but mixed in with some really good plants like compass plant right there, or our showy milkweed, another good monarch plant, or the purple ironweed plant. Let's see if I can pull up a spiny, oh, that's why I don't like the spiny blackberries, because I can no longer be barefoot in my backyard. But here you can see the milkweed, and it's made its seeds. And that's what we want. We want to get those native plants in here, get those seeds going, and hopefully we have new patches of milkweed next year. But you can see what I mean by this just kind of becoming trails as we go through the prairie. Here's our 5-year, 8-year prairie with the black-eyed Susans, popping up in it. All sorts of interesting prairie plants in there. Got a monarch going to our tick seed sunflower. And this is our wetland prairie here, the wettest part of the backyard, so we try to get wetland plants in there. Over here is a good example of what happens if you don't stay ahead of the ragweed. You think native prairie, and initially you're like, oh, that would be easy because there's no maintenance. You just let it go. It's deceptive that way, and that it's a lot easier to have a lawn in your backyard than it is to get a quality backyard prairie, because you really have to get in there and pull out the undesirables and put in the desirables. Here's a good example of a 10-year patch that I haven't touched, not done one thing with, and it's overrun with common milkweed here, giant milkweed here, and doesn't take 10 years to happen. I got lazy this year and didn't do anything with my blackberries, and my blackberry patch became a giant ragweed patch in 1 year because I didn't get in there and weed it. And 1 year later, 10 foot, 12 foot tall, giant ragweed making tons of really allergenic pollen. So at this time of year, I sneeze and gag and cough when I come into my backyard because I didn't get after the ragweed. But you can see this fantastic stretch of showy tick seed sunflower, all sorts of other interesting wetland plants mixed in there, sedges, rushes, one of my favorite plants, the cardinal flower here, which the hummingbirds go crazy for, and tons of fall asters that are in throughout this whole prairie. And in another month, this becomes the fall aster show, and this place gets swarmed with insects. But if you just listen, you can actually hear the difference between being on a lawn where it's going to be relatively quiet and this amazing biodiversity. Just, you can hear it. You don't even have to look at it to recognize how much this is supporting. All the while pounding carbon down into the soil and just being a lot more fun backyard to walk around it. I tell you, my son has a cross-country end of the year party each year, and nighttime capture the flag through all these prairie trails. It's pretty wild. So keep that in mind as you're designing backyards, that you can do some cool stuff. Alright, this is the spot on the in the backyard where in the springtime I was talking about letting your lawn grow up a little bit with all the weeds in the springtime, just to support that biodiversity, to support those hungry pollinators. I talked about how different my neighbor's lawn looks like, who sprays it and feeds it, than mine did at that time of the year. But you can see now what looked like a big patch of weeds in the spring. Once you put a mow on it, it just looks like a normal patch of well-tended lawn. And I'll do the same thing again next year. I'll let it grow up for a month or two before I mow it for that first time and let all that biodiversity get supported. But all those same plants, all those same seeds are in here, but mowing it, it looks the same as and feels the same as a really well-kept lawn. So keep that in mind. Try to think out of the box when it comes to what you're doing with your front or your backyard. There are super fun things you can do, especially when we start talking about fall in Oklahoma, and just get great, showy, biodiverse, productive, fertile chunks of your yard. All right, be well.